graders, we are wrapping up chapter 14, and the last lesson that we're going to be covering is one where we get to choose the correct formula. So we've talked about perimeter, we've talked about area, we've talked about volume, and we've talked about surface area, where we put all of those different faces together. Today we're going to choose the correct formula to solve the problem. So when you are referencing this lesson, you can look in your book, chapter 14, lesson 8, on page 644. Here you'll also see some information that will help you as you go through this lesson. As I said, we're going to select and use appropriate units and formulas to measure length, perimeter, area, and volume. This is the key concept chart that is in your book that you can look over. Remember, perimeter, you might need to find perimeter when you are framing a picture, when you're putting fence around your garden, things like that. Area, we talked about that, where you might find the area if you're laying carpet and you want to fill that whole area. If you're putting down sod and you want to fill that area. If you're painting, you might find area of a wall. Volume, you are going to use that when you're trying to fill something. So Mrs. Lund shared with you how to find the volume. Well, now we have to be able to apply that. So if you wanted to fill your fish tank with water, you would find volume. If you wanted to fill your sandbox with sand, there you would find volume, okay? So here's our first example. And I'm just going to use a different name. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her name, but that's a proper noun and we can substitute a name. So we're going to say Nora wants to buy a blanket that will cover the top of her bed. Her bed is 78 inches long and 36 inches wide. Here we have to determine whether she should find perimeter, area, or volume, and then solve. Well, we know that she wants to cover the top of her bed, and so anytime when you're covering the top, you would find area. And we know that the formula for area is length times width or base times height, either one. So in this case, we would take 78 times 36, and whatever that calculation ends up being, you would take that times the unit inches and square, okay? And you can use your calculator in order to solve. So we plugged that in. They're doing the same thing that we did. They replaced 78 for the length, 36 for the width, multiplied that together and got 2,808. And our unit of measure in this case was inches, so it would be square inches. 2,808 square inches. Here's another example. Adele wants to buy a tablecloth that will just cover the surface of her rectangular table. Her table is 8 feet long and 5 feet wide. Determine whether she should find the perimeter, area, or volume, and then solve. Well, let's think about that. A tablecloth covering a table. You want to cover that surface, correct? And in that case, it's kind of like putting carpet down, painting a wall. We're covering the top of her table, so then we would find, again, area. If we know that it is 8 feet long and 5 feet wide, you would take length times width, 8 times 5, and you would get that unit of feet squared. 8 times 5 we know is 40, so it would be 40 square feet. Again, we're finding area when we want to cover. The next example, we have Hector. And Hector wants to put wood trim around the top edge of his fish tank that is shown below. Now this one is a little tricky, and this one sometimes stumps some of our 5th graders because they say, oh, fish tank, Mrs. Yost or Mrs. Kinsley or Mr. Bessie, Mrs. Lund, they've talked about fish tank, filling it, and they automatically turn to volume. But if you read carefully, we're talking about wood around the trim of the top. And again, if we're just looking at the trim of the top, we're not finding area. What are we finding, boys and girls?
Perimeter.
We're finding perimeter. So in order to solve that, we have to take the dimensions. We know 15 plus 24. Okay, you could do that plus that and then double it, or you could use repeated addition and go 15 plus 15, 24 plus 24, and when you add that all together, and they're doubling it. When you add that all together, you get 78, and we're finding perimeter, so it's just our unit of measure. Okay, so I can't remember if that was inches. It was inches. So 78 inches, just inches. Another example, we have Emile. We're going to go with Emile. Wants to put fence around her yard. Her yard is 24 feet by 26 feet. We have to determine whether she should find the perimeter, area, or volume, and then solve. Now again, we're putting fence around her yard. Okay, when we're putting edging around something, we know that we're going to find perimeter. And if we know the dimensions of her yard are 26 feet by 24 feet, you could say 26 plus 26 plus 24 plus 24, or you could say 26 times 2 plus 24 times 2. And when you did that, if you plug that into your calculators or add it all up or multiply it out, you would get 100 feet, okay? Another example, we have Jonah who wants to calculate how much cereal he needs to, look at this, when we're reading carefully, refill an empty cereal box. Determine whether he should find the perimeter, area, or volume, and then solve. Now we are refilling something, like we refill a fish tank, or we refill our sandbox with sand. When we're refilling something, what do we find? We find
Volume.
Volume, right? So in this case, we know that the formula for volume is length times width times height, okay? And when we take those three units, 2 times 7 times 10, and multiply that out, I'm going to do some mental math here. 2 times 10 is 20, and we know that 20 times 7 would be 140. We're talking about volume. We took three numbers times each other, or as Mrs. Lund said, 3 different dimensions, so we would take that number 140, and it would be 140 inches cubed to the third power. 3 numbers that you multiply to the third power. Okay, our last one, I believe. Belinda needs to know how much water it takes to fill. We're filling something again. Her fish tank. Her fish tank is 16 inches by 25 inches by 13 inches. Determine whether she should find perimeter, area, or volume, and then solve. We're filling something. So if we know we're filling something, the formula that we would use would in fact be volume. Okay, again, our formula for volume is length times width times height. Plug in the numbers that we know. We know it's 16 by 25 by 13. Okay, and in a problem like that, use your calculator. Okay, so 16 times 25 times 13, we're multiplying 3 numbers. So even looking at this, looking at my answers, I know that it would have to be, it couldn't be this, it couldn't be this, it could be this if it's volume. It would have to be our unit of measure to the third power cubed. Okay, so 5,200 inches cubed. All right. I hope you are doing well, and if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to any of your teachers. All right, thank you.